Keanu Reeves thought he was just ordering a late-night pizza until a single guitar note from the parking lot stopped him cold. A delivery boy, a broken motorbike, and a talent so unreal it made Keanu run downstairs without a second thought. What he discovered next would change that boy's entire future and shock the world. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Los Angeles was quiet in a way it rarely ever was. It was close to midnight, the kind of hour when even the restless city seemed to sigh and settle. In his small, aging apartment tucked away on the east side, Keanu Reeves finally allowed himself a moment of stillness. No cameras, no interviews, no scripts, no expectations, just an old lamp casting a soft amber glow across a worn couch and the faint scent of the pizza he had ordered only minutes earlier. He picked up the empty box, planning to toss it before heading to bed, grateful for a rare evening that belonged only to him. But just as he took a step toward the kitchen, something made him stop. A single melodic note floated through the air. Not loud, not intrusive, but unmistakably beautiful. Keanu paused, listening. It was faint, carried up from the parking lot below through the half-open window. Another note followed, then another. Together they formed an intricate pattern, delicate yet precise, like a memory unfolding through sound. Keanu lowered the pizza box to the counter without looking away from the window. The melody grew more complex, weaving emotion into every measure. It struck him immediately. This wasn't casual strumming. This wasn't noise or practice. This was something deep, intentional, carefully shaped by hands that understood music on a level most never reach. Keanu walked closer to the window, inch by inch, feeling a pull in his chest he couldn't explain. The night breeze brushed past him as he leaned forward. Down below, between the rows of dusty cars and flickering lights, he spotted a lone figure sitting on the seat of an old motorbike. A cheap guitar was nestled against his chest, its wood scratched and dulled by years of use. And those hands, the young man's fingers, moved with unfaltering confidence, sliding across the strings with a tenderness that contrasted his modest appearance. Keanu recognized him immediately. The pizza delivery boy, Evan, barely 20, with polite eyes and a timid smile that barely lasted long enough to be seen. He had walked away only a few minutes earlier, apologizing for being late as he handed over the pizza box. Keanu remembered the worn shoes, the oversized shirt, the frayed guitar case strapped to his back. He had noticed all those things, but he hadn't known this. He hadn't known that beneath that shy voice lived a sound capable of freezing a man mid-step. Evan wasn't looking for an audience. His head tilted slightly downward, eyes half closed, as if the world around him had blurred into nothing. He played with a gentleness that carried weight, every note filled with unspoken emotion. There was pain there, but also hope, like a confession wrapped inside a melody. The song rose and fell, swirling through the parking lot, slipping between parked cars, and drifting upward through the open window where Keanu stood motionless. Keanu felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of recognition, not of the song itself, but of the soul behind it. He had played with musicians who trained all their lives, artists who lived for their craft. But this was something different. Natural talent, rare talent, the kind that didn't come from expensive lessons or polished studios, the kind that grew in isolation, in quiet corners, in someone who had more heart than opportunity. Keanu's breath caught. This boy wasn't just playing. He was giving everything he had to a night sky that didn't even know his name. Keanu pushed the window open a little wider, letting the sound wash over him with fuller clarity. The melody grew more intricate, shifting between soft patterns and quick bursts of fingerstyle precision that shouldn't have been possible on a cheap guitar with worn strings. Every pluck echoed with emotion, and every slide felt like a story Evan wasn't able to tell in words. It was the kind of music that made a person stop and look inward, even if only for a moment. Keanu felt that familiar ache in the chest, the one he associated with loss memory and the long, winding path of survival. He understood that feeling well. For several seconds, he simply stood there, unmoving, absorbing the unexpected beauty coming from below. A single streetlight flickered overhead, casting a dim glow across the parking lot. Evan, still unaware he was being watched, played with the intensity of someone who had been waiting all day for a moment to breathe. His back hunched slightly, shoulders relaxing only when the music carried him forward. His foot gently tapped the side of the motorbike, keeping time, as if he were performing on a stage only he could see. His expression shifted with each phrase, pained one moment, peaceful the next. It was as if the guitar was the only place in the world where he could put down the weight he carried. Keanu felt something inside him tighten with urgency, a pull so strong he didn't question it. Without a second thought, he stepped away from the window and moved toward the door. The hallway lights buzzed softly as he passed, descending the narrow staircase, 2 steps at a time. He didn't know exactly what he planned to say, but he knew he needed to go down there, needed to see this up close, needed to understand the story behind a young man who played like he had lived 1,000 quiet heartbreaks. The night air greeted him as he stepped into the open parking lot, cool and still. The city noises he was used to, cars, sirens, distant chatter, were absent here. Only Evan's music filled the space, turning the entire empty lot into something sacred. Keanu slowed as he approached, not wanting to startle him. From a few feet away, he could see even more clearly how the boy's fingers moved with a grace that didn't match his humble appearance. Calluses marked each fingertip, the kind you only earn after years of relentless practice. His cheap guitar, though old, was held with the care of something precious. Keanu could have spoken, could have interrupted, could have announced his presence. But he didn't. Not yet. He waited until Evan reached the end of the piece, letting the final note hover in the darkness. It faded slowly, gently, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the sound itself. Evan exhaled, almost trembling, as if he had poured more of himself into the melody than he intended to. Keanu cleared his throat softly. Evan jerked upright, startled eyes wide as he clutched the guitar closer to his chest. For a moment he looked like a frightened kid caught doing something wrong. But Keanu only offered a warm, quiet smile. And in that instant, before either of them spoke, Keanu knew the truth with absolute certainty. This wasn't an ordinary delivery boy. This was a prodigy hidden in plain sight. Evan blinked several times, still gripping the guitar as if someone might pull it from his hands. His breath hitched when he recognized the man standing a few feet away. Keanu didn't move any closer. He kept a respectful distance, letting the young man calm down. The last thing he wanted was to make him feel exposed. The parking lot lights cast long shadows around them, creating a quiet cocoon where only the echo of the last note remained. Keanu nodded toward the guitar, his voice gentle. He told Evan he hadn't meant to scare him, but the music had reached him before he even understood what he was hearing. Evan's cheeks flushed as he lowered his gaze, murmuring that he didn't usually play where anyone could hear. He admitted that he only practiced outside because his roommates complained, and the parking lot was the only place he felt free enough to lose himself in the sound. Keanu stepped a little closer, just enough for Evan to see sincerity in his expression. He told him the truth without hesitation. What he heard wasn't ordinary. It wasn't something you stumble upon in the middle of the night by chance. It was rare. It was special. Evan looked up, unsure whether to believe him. For a moment, uncertainty flickered through his eyes, the kind carried by someone who had spent his whole life being overlooked. Keanu saw that hesitation, and something in him hardened with quiet resolve. He knew talent when he heard it, and he knew how easily talent could disappear when life demanded survival instead of dreams. Standing there beneath the dim streetlight, he understood that this accidental moment wasn't accidental at all. He was meant to hear that music, and Evan was meant to be found. Hours before the haunting melody drifted into Keanu's window, the night had been just like any other. A quiet evening, a simple craving for something warm, and a small act of support for a local family-owned pizza shop he had ordered from for years. He liked the place because the owners treated everyone with kindness, whether they were celebrities or neighbors passing through. They worked hard, remembered faces, and made their pizza with a sincerity that reminded him of a different time in his life. That night, he placed the order without thinking twice. He had no idea how much that decision would matter. When the knock finally came, it was softer than usual. 3 hesitant taps, almost apologetic. Keanu opened the door and saw a young man standing in the dim hallway, shoulders drawn inward like he wanted to take up as little space as possible. Evan held the insulated pizza bag close to his chest, as if afraid it might slip from his hands. His eyes lifted briefly in greeting before darting downward again, avoiding prolonged contact. His politeness was quiet, almost fragile, wrapped in a trembling smile that looked more like an apology than a greeting. Keanu immediately noticed his appearance. Evan's shirt hung loosely on him 2 sizes too big, at least the sleeves swallowing his thin arms. The jeans were faded at the knees, frayed slightly at the hems, and his shoes cheap. Canvas sneakers were worn down near the soles. On his back was a guitar case so old that the fabric had thinned near the edges. The zipper looked like it had been repaired more than once, and the strap showed the kind of wear that only years of constant use could create. It wasn't the case of someone who played music casually. It was the case of someone who carried their instrument everywhere, because it was the one thing in life they couldn't let go of. When Evan said his name, Keanu had to lean in slightly to hear him. His voice was soft, almost nervous, like a kid who had learned long ago not to take up too much attention. He stuttered a little as he confirmed the order, apologizing 3 separate times for being late, even though he was only behind by a few minutes. Keanu told him it was no problem at all, but Evan shook his head anyway, insisting he should have been quicker. He explained that he had taken on extra deliveries that evening because he was trying to earn enough money to cover part of his next semester's tuition. His words spilled out quickly, the kind that came from someone who felt the need to justify their existence. Keanu felt a familiar ache in his chest as he listened. He had met many young people who carried that same invisible weight, the kind that comes from trying to balance schoolwork survival and dreams all at once. Evan held out the pizza box with both hands, his fingers trembling slightly. It was a small detail, but Keanu noticed. It wasn't fear, it was exhaustion, the kind that sits in your bones. And yet underneath that exhaustion, there was something else. A spark, a quiet resilience, the kind of determination found in someone who had learned to push forward even when the world gave them little to stand on. As Evan shifted the pizza bag from one arm to the other, Keanu caught a glimpse of the calluses lining the young man's fingertips. They were thick, worn, and unmistakably shaped by strings, evidence of long nights of practice. It was a detail most people would overlook, but not Keanu. He recognized the marks immediately. They were the same kind musicians carried with pride, except Evan didn't display them proudly. He hid them, almost as if he believed they didn't matter. Keanu handed him the payment along with a small additional tip, one he hoped would help even a little. Evan tried to refuse it, shaking his head quickly with an uncomfortable smile. He insisted the amount was too much, that he didn't deserve it. Keanu gently pushed it back into his hand and told him it wasn't about deserving anything. It was simply appreciation. Evan finally accepted after a long pause, though he tucked the money into his pocket with the hesitation of someone who was used to being careful with every dollar. Keanu noticed how Evan kept glancing at the guitar case on his back, as if checking to make sure it was still there. There was affection in the gesture, but also fear. Fear of losing the one thing in his life that meant more than he could ever explain. Keanu wondered how many hours Evan must have spent playing not for applause or attention, but for the simple need to keep himself together. He could sense that the guitar wasn't a hobby. It was a lifeline. While signing the receipt, Keanu asked casually if Evan played often. The young man froze for half a second, almost startled by the question. Then he nodded, but quickly brushed it off, saying he wasn't very good, and only played to relax after long shifts. His voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. Keanu didn't press him. He understood too well what it was like to protect something personal, something that felt too vulnerable to share. Evan apologized again for taking too long on his deliveries. He mentioned he had been covering shifts for another driver who had fallen ill and that he didn't want the shop owner to lose business because of him. As he spoke, Keanu realized the extent of responsibility this young man carried at such a young age. School, part-time work, shared living expenses, and the quiet hope held in that frayed guitar case. It was too much for a 20-year-old, yet Evan carried it with a kind of grace that only hardship could shape. Before turning to leave, Evan thanked him sincerely. Not with the empty politeness people sometimes used, but with real gratitude, as if Keanu's kindness had reached him deeper than intended. Then he started down the hallway, his steps soft, his shoulders still slightly curled inward. Keanu watched him go, noting the gentle sway of the guitar case as he walked. Something about it lingered with him long after he closed the door. Had the night ended there, Evan would have remained just another hard-working delivery boy trying to navigate life. Someone kind, someone struggling, someone quietly carrying a dream no one else could see. But destiny had already decided the night would unfold differently. Keanu carried the pizza box to the kitchen, but something about the encounter wouldn't leave his mind. There was a heaviness in the way Evan walked away, a quiet resignation that didn't belong on someone so young. Keanu had met countless people throughout his life, but every now and then someone stood out without even trying. Evan was one of those people, not because of anything dramatic he had done, but because of everything he was trying to endure without complaint. He set the pizza down and replayed the brief interaction in his mind. The timid voice, the worn clothes, the frayed guitar case that looked like it had traveled miles of life with him. Most people would have missed these things. Most wouldn't have cared to notice. But Keanu saw them all clearly. He saw a young man fighting quietly against circumstances far larger than he ever should have faced alone. As he sat on the couch, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from outside, followed by the distant hum of a motorcycle engine starting up. It was probably Evan heading to his next delivery, pushing through another shift, another hour, another late night. Keanu imagined him riding between dim streetlights, carrying both pizza boxes and hidden dreams on his back. He didn't know why the moment mattered so much, but it did. Something told him that the guitar wasn't just a hobby, and the pizza job wasn't just a job. They were pieces of a life that had been forced into survival mode for too long. Keanu sensed that if he hadn't opened the window later that night, he might never have discovered the depth of the young man standing outside his door. He had no idea just how strong that instinct would prove to be. Keanu had barely sat down on the edge of his couch when the first note drifted into the apartment. It cut through the stillness like a soft flash of light, unexpected and strangely familiar in its emotional weight. He turned his head toward the window, listening. The melody grew clearer, more intricate, as if someone outside was pouring years of unspoken stories into a single stream of sound. Something inside him tightened. He recognized that depth, that color, that indescribable honesty only a true musician carried. He didn't give himself time to rethink it. Before the next measure even finished, he was already moving across the room. His heart beat faster with every step, not from urgency, but from the shock of discovering something extraordinary in a place where no one expected it. He reached the doorway, grabbed his keys out of habit, then paused. He realized he didn't need them. He wasn't going anywhere except downstairs. The stairwell was dim, lit by a single flickering bulb that buzzed softly above his head. As he descended, the music grew richer, echoing faintly against the concrete walls. Each step seemed to fall naturally in rhythm with the guitar's pulse, as if the melody were guiding him downward. He wasn't worried about what he would say. He wasn't even thinking about how unusual this moment was. All he cared about was reaching the source of the sound before it disappeared back into the night. By the time he reached the bottom floor, the entire parking lot seemed wrapped in the softness of the music. The cold air hit him first, crisp against his face. Then the sight of Evan sitting alone on the seat of his old motorbike guitar, resting against one knee. His posture was relaxed in a way Keanu hadn't seen earlier. The shy, hunched shoulders were gone. The uncertainty had melted away. Here, wrapped in the quiet glow of a flickering street lamp, Evan looked like someone entirely different. His fingers moved with graceful precision, dancing effortlessly across the strings. The worn-out guitar produced a sound that shouldn't have been possible from an instrument in such condition. And yet, the notes filled the parking lot with warmth, weaving emotion into the empty spaces between cars. Evan shifted subtly with the music, head tilted, slightly eyes closed, expression calm, but full of feeling. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply playing because he needed to. Keanu stopped several feet away, overwhelmed by what he was witnessing. He had been around musicians for decades. He had seen talent, studied it, admired it. He'd played on stage beside some of the most dedicated artists he knew. But nothing compared to this raw, unfiltered sincerity. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't practiced for an audience. It was instinct, nature, heart. The kind of gift that only appeared once in a great while. Keanu let the final notes fade before he stepped forward. Evan didn't notice him at first, not until the last chord fell into silence. When he finally looked up, what followed would change everything. Evan lifted his head slowly, his fingers still resting on the strings, as if afraid to move. When he saw Keanu standing only a few steps away, his entire posture changed. His shoulders tensed, his hands tightened around the guitar's neck. His eyes widened with alarm, like he had been caught trespassing somewhere he shouldn't be. Keanu stopped before getting too close, giving him space to breathe. The last thing he wanted was to make him feel exposed or ashamed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt delicate, as if a single wrong word could shatter the fragile stillness that the music had built. Keanu could see the question forming behind Evan's eyes. Why was he there? Had he done something wrong? Why had the quiet man who ordered pizza suddenly appeared in the parking lot? Keanu nodded toward the guitar, his voice calm and steady. He told Evan the truth that he had heard the music through his window, and it had stopped him in his tracks. He said it with sincerity, not praise, but recognition. Evan blinked a few times, confused, embarrassed, almost apologetic. He shifted on the motorbike seat, pulling the guitar closer to his chest, as if shielding it from judgment. He said he didn't know anyone could hear him from upstairs. His voice wavered slightly, revealing a vulnerability that hit Keanu harder than he expected. He whispered that he usually tried to find empty places to practice, places where no one would interrupt him, places where he wouldn't bother anyone. The idea that someone might have listened made him uneasy, even though the sound he produced was beautiful enough to silence an entire room. Keanu took a slow breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. He told Evan the melody was extraordinary. Not good, not decent. Extraordinary. Evan's eyes lowered immediately, a nervous smile tugging briefly at the edge of his mouth before disappearing. He shook his head, brushing off the compliment like someone who had never learned how to accept one. He insisted he wasn't very skilled, that he just liked playing after long hours, because it helped him feel less overwhelmed. Keanu stepped a little closer, not enough to intimidate, but enough for Evan to see the sincerity on his face. He explained that he had spent much of his life around musicians, people who lived and breathed sound, people who practiced thousands of hours, people who built careers on talent. And what he heard tonight was rare. Evan's breath stalled slightly at those words, as if no one had ever said something so direct to him. Evan's fingers trembled as he glanced down at the guitar, brushing the worn wood with gentle familiarity. He told Keanu it was old secondhand and barely held its tuning anymore. But he didn't mind. It was the only one he could afford. He said it quietly, without self-pity, just simple truth. Keanu watched him closely. The way Evan held that guitar wasn't the way someone held an object. It was the way someone held a lifeline. There, under the dim streetlight, surrounded by silence and shadow, Keanu felt something shift inside him, a realization, a certainty. This wasn't just a talented kid playing for himself. This was someone who had spent his whole life waiting for a door to open. Keanu let a moment of silence pass, giving Evan space to settle his racing thoughts. The young man looked overwhelmed, unsure whether to put the guitar away or keep holding it, unsure whether to apologize or run. His uncertainty stirred something protective in Keanu. He could see clearly that this kid had spent his whole life shrinking himself, trying not to inconvenience anyone, trying not to take up space. But his music did the opposite. It demanded to be heard. Keanu gently asked if Evan would play one more piece. Not for an audition, not for judgment, simply because the music deserved to exist outside of fear. Evan hesitated, eyes darting toward the apartment building, toward the night sky, toward anything that could offer an escape from the intensity of being seen. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he nodded. He positioned his fingers again, took a shaky breath, and began to play. This time, Keanu watched more closely, taking in every detail. The way Evan's shoulders softened the moment the sound emerged, the way his brow furrowed with emotion. During the more delicate measures, the way he exhaled quietly when the melody resolved. It was not the technique that struck Keanu most, although the technique was impressive. It was the sincerity. There was no performance in it, no ego, just pure storytelling through sound. When the final chord faded, Evan lifted his gaze with the timid hope of someone expecting to hear he wasn't good enough. But Keanu didn't critique anything. He didn't offer technical advice. He didn't soften his words with cautious encouragement. He simply asked the question that had risen inside him from the very first moment he heard that melody drifting through the window. "Why don't you show this talent to the world?" Evan froze. He stared as if the question itself was impossible. Then a nervous laugh slipped out, soft, awkward, almost painful. He shook his head quickly, insisting that people like him didn't get chances like that. He said he had no connections, no money, no confidence, nothing that mattered. He said playing in parking lots was enough. But Keanu already knew the truth. Parking lots were never meant to be his stage. He was just waiting for someone to tell him he belonged on a real one. The parking lot felt softer after Evan's second song, as if the night itself was listening. Keanu stayed quiet, giving him room to breathe, letting the emotion settle. Evan shifted the guitar on his lap, unsure of what to do with the sudden attention he had never asked for. His fingers traced the edge of the cheap wooden body, a habit formed from years of soothing himself through music. Keanu could see that the weight he carried wasn't from the instrument, but from everything he had lived through before this moment. When Keanu gently asked him how long he had been playing, Evan hesitated. His eyes dropped to the cracked concrete beneath the motorbike, and he shrugged as if the answer didn't matter. But then he spoke in pieces, like someone peeling back layers he rarely let anyone see. He told Keanu he had been playing since he was about 10, though he had never taken a single real lesson in his life. Everything he knew came from watching old guitar tutorials at the public library, because he didn't have a computer at home. He saved the videos he liked onto cheap flash drives and replayed them at night until he memorized every movement. He worked part-time even as a teenager, helping his mother pay for bills after his father left without warning. He described it quietly, without bitterness, as if abandonment had become another ordinary part of life. His mother worked long shifts at a small grocery store, sometimes leaving before sunrise and returning after midnight. Evan grew used to caring for himself, eating whatever leftovers he could find, using his guitar as a companion during long hours of silence. Keanu listened closely, hearing not just the words, but the strain behind them. Evan explained that he now attended a community college, studying general education courses in the mornings. He didn't know what he wanted for his future yet, because future plans cost money he didn't have. He shared a cramped room with 2 other students who were also juggling part-time jobs and unpredictable schedules. They meant well, but there was no space in that apartment for guitar playing, especially not the emotional kind Evan relied on to cope with everything happening around him. So he practiced outside. Parking lots, empty stairwells, parks after dark. Anywhere no one would complain, anywhere he could let himself feel something without being judged. He said it with a small laugh, but the sound didn't hide the exhaustion. Evan told Keanu he often played during breaks between deliveries, sitting on the motorbike until his next order came in. Some nights he barely earned enough in tips to cover gas for the following day. Some nights he thought about quitting school altogether, but every time he touched the guitar, something inside him steadied just enough to keep going. Keanu watched him speak, struck by how casually Evan described a life built entirely on survival. Every detail revealed a quiet strength, the kind shaped by necessity rather than choice. Evan didn't realize it, but every hardship he mentioned only made his talent more extraordinary. He wasn't just a kid who played well. He was someone who had refused to let life take away the one thing that made him feel alive, and Keanu could feel that truth settling heavily in his own chest. Evan shifted on the motorbike seat as he continued speaking, his voice dropping even softer, as if he wasn't used to anyone actually listening. He explained that he never meant for anyone to hear him play. Music was the only place he didn't have to pretend he was fine. It was where he let out fear, frustration, loneliness, and everything he bottled up during the day. He said it gently, almost cautiously, like someone confessing a secret he wasn't sure he should share. He told Keanu that most days were a constant rush from school to work and back again. He rarely slept more than a few hours at night, and he often ate his meals in the spaces between deliveries. His professors knew his name, but not his story. His classmates often didn't notice when he slipped into the back row exhausted from the night before. He played guitar during short breaks because it was the only thing that reminded him he was more than just someone struggling to stay afloat. Keanu listened with steady patience, nodding here and there, but mostly letting Evan speak freely. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to solve anything. He simply held the moment open for a young man who had never been given space to tell his truth. Evan rubbed his thumb along the worn bridge of the guitar as he talked about how hard it had been since his father left. He remembered being too young to understand why the man who used to help him tune his first toy guitar suddenly disappeared. His mother told him they would be okay, but even at 10 years old, he knew that wasn't entirely true. From that day on, Evan learned that music had to come from him alone. No father, no teacher, no mentor, just him and whatever old videos he could find. He practiced by watching the hands of guitar players online, rewinding the same moments hundreds of times until he understood every movement. He never had the luxury of learning the proper way, so he taught himself in the only way he could. His fingers developed unconventional shapes, strange angles, and techniques that weren't found in textbooks. But they worked, and they made his sound uniquely his own. He explained how the library staff would sometimes let him stay a little longer while they were closing, noticing how focused he was, how hungry he was to learn. He saved every spare dollar to buy new strings, even when it meant skipping meals or waiting another week to refill his bus card. His roommates didn't know any of this. Most people didn't. Evan kept his struggles quiet because he didn't want pity. He didn't want to burden anyone. He said he'd learned long ago to carry his problems alone. As he finished describing the long days and longer nights, his voice cracked for the first time, not from sadness, but from the weight of always having to be strong. He laughed it off, apologizing under his breath, as if emotion was something to be ashamed of. Keanu shook his head gently, telling him he had nothing to apologize for. In that moment, he saw clearly that Evan wasn't weak at all. He was resilient in a way most people never needed to be. And Keanu felt a growing determination to make sure this young man's struggle wouldn't be the end of his story. Evan paused, letting the weight of everything he had shared settle between them. The parking lot felt unusually still, as if the world itself was giving him space to breathe. He looked down at his guitar fingers brushing lightly over the strings with a tenderness that revealed everything he didn't say aloud. He told Keanu that music was the only place he felt safe, the only place where he didn't feel small, the only place where dreams didn't feel ridiculous or impossible. He admitted that some nights when everything felt too heavy, he would come out to this exact parking lot and play until the sun rose. No audience, no applause, just the sound of his own heart trying to find something to hold on to. He said he didn't think he had talent. He simply played because it was the only thing in his life that made sense, the only thing that stayed constant when everything else kept slipping through his fingers. Keanu felt a quiet ache growing with each word. He could see clearly now that Evan wasn't just gifted. He was driven by something deeper, something raw and painfully honest. He had survived abandonment, financial struggle, overwhelming responsibility, and a future clouded by uncertainty. And still he played music with the purity of someone unbroken. Evan finally lifted his gaze, meeting Keanu's eyes for the first time without flinching. There was a vulnerability there, but also a flicker of strength he didn't seem aware he carried. He confessed that he never believed someone like him could belong anywhere near a stage. He didn't come from money. He didn't have a teacher. He didn't know anyone in the industry. He didn't have confidence. All he ever had was this battered guitar and a sky full of quiet nights. Keanu felt the truth of it settle deep inside him. This young man had every reason to quit, yet he hadn't. This wasn't just talent. This was grit, heart, resilience, a kind of strength that couldn't be taught. And as Keanu stood there listening to the story behind the music, he realized something important. Evan didn't need someone to rescue him. He needed someone to believe in him. The night air around them felt heavier after Evan's confession, as though the truth he carried had reshaped the quiet parking lot. Keanu lowered himself onto the cold metal seat of the motorcycle beside Evan, careful not to crowd him, careful not to break the fragile trust that had begun forming between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The faint hum of a distant street lamp flickered overhead, and the soft aftertaste of Evan's last melody still lingered in the air. Keanu sat with his elbows resting lightly on his knees, looking straight ahead rather than directly at him. He wanted Evan to feel safe, not scrutinized. He spoke softly, letting his words settle, gently telling him that talent has a way of surviving in silence. It grows in the cracks of hardship blooms, even when no one is watching, and waits patiently for the moment someone finally recognizes it. He said it the way someone speaks from experience, someone who understands what it means to hold a dream quietly until life gives permission to reveal it. Evan tried to brush it off with a nervous chuckle. His shoulders rose and fell in a half-hearted shrug, and he mumbled that dreams were too expensive. He said he couldn't afford the luxury of chasing something uncertain when his real life demanded so much. Tuition, rent, work, responsibility. Reality didn't leave space for hope. He said it like someone used to lowering his expectations long before life lowered them for him. Keanu turned his head slightly, studying Evan's tired posture, the hunched shoulders, the way his fingers clung protectively to the neck of the guitar. He told him gently that dreams weren't luxuries, they were lifelines, and some people needed them more than food or rest or even stability. Evan swallowed hard, caught off guard by the sincerity in Keanu's voice. It wasn't flattery, it wasn't encouragement for the sake of kindness, it was truth. Evan's breath slowed. His eyes darted down to the pavement as he whispered that he had no one behind him, no one to support him, no one to show him how to try. He said it simply, without bitterness, but the sadness behind the words ran deep. It was the sound of someone who had learned to expect nothing, so disappointment couldn't hurt him anymore. Keanu felt the weight of that in his chest. He shifted a little closer, not enough to overwhelm, but enough for Evan to feel the warmth of someone standing beside him rather than above him. He looked at him with a softness that disarmed even the thickest walls of insecurity and said the words with absolute clarity. "You said you have no one behind you, but you have me." Evan froze. The world around him seemed to stop moving. His fingers tightened around the guitar as if bracing for something he didn't know how to handle. His breath caught mid-inhale. His eyes flickered in disbelief as if the meaning behind those words couldn't possibly be meant for him. But they were, and Keanu meant every single one. Evan's reaction was immediate and instinctive. He shook his head, not sharply, but in a slow, stunned motion, like someone trying to push away a reality that felt too big to accept. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. His breath trembled. His eyes glistened with a confusion that bordered on fear. He wasn't afraid of Keanu. He was afraid of hope. Hope had betrayed him too many times before. When he finally managed to speak, his voice came out strained. He said he didn't understand why someone like Keanu would want to help him. He wasn't special. He wasn't important. He didn't have a future lined up or a clear direction or even a stable routine. He was just a delivery boy with a guitar that barely held together. Those were his words, just a delivery boy, as if that title erased everything else he carried inside him. Keanu shook his head gently. He didn't let Evan diminish himself. He told him that talent didn't require permission from status or background. It didn't matter where he worked or where he lived. What mattered was the sound he created, the soul behind it, the resilience that shaped it. Keanu made it clear that he wasn't offering charity. He wasn't rescuing him. He wasn't trying to change his life for him. He was simply opening a door. And Evan was the one who had to decide whether or not to walk through it. With that, Keanu stood up slightly from the motorcycle seat, adjusted his posture, and extended the simplest, most life-changing invitation Evan had ever heard. He told him that he had a private home studio, not a glamorous Hollywood production room, not a place filled with technicians and producers and blinking equipment. It was just a quiet, creative space with warm lighting instruments collected over the years, simple cameras, and memories of his own beginnings. He told Evan he wanted to bring him there, to record something real, something professional, something that would give him a chance to be seen by the people who could actually help him go further. The offer hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying. Evan's face went pale with disbelief. He stared at Keanu as if waiting for him to say he was joking. When Keanu didn't, Evan's voice cracked on his next breath. He said it was too much, too generous, too out of reach. He said people didn't offer things like this to someone like him. He wasn't sure he deserved it. He wasn't sure he could handle it. Keanu crouched slightly to meet Evan's lowered gaze. He spoke slowly, carefully, grounding each word with purpose. He told him that generosity wasn't about deserving. It was about recognition. He recognized the talent. He recognized the struggle. He recognized the spirit. He wasn't offering a shortcut. He was offering a chance, a real one. Evan swallowed hard, gripping the guitar as though it were the only stable thing in his life. His mind raced through every reason to refuse, every fear, every doubt, every voice from his past telling him to stay small. But another part of him, deep and trembling, wanted to believe Keanu, wanted to believe this moment was real. Keanu saw the internal war in his eyes and softened his voice even further. This isn't a gift, Evan. It's a doorway, and you already have the key. Evan sat completely still, the weight of Keanu's words sinking deeper with every quiet second that passed. He looked down at his hands, studying the calluses that told the story of years spent practicing alone, hidden from the world. His voice came out soft when he finally spoke again. He said he didn't know if he was ready. He didn't know if he was good enough. He didn't know if someone like him was meant for anything beyond what he was already doing. Keanu didn't argue with those fears. He understood them. He had lived versions of them himself. Instead, he lowered himself back onto the motorcycle seat beside Evan, making sure they were eye level, and told him that everyone who ever made something meaningful started from a place of uncertainty. Confidence wasn't something you waited for. It was something you built by taking the first step, even when your voice shook. Evan's breath hitched. A long silence followed. It wasn't resistance anymore. It was a boy standing at the edge of a life-changing moment, terrified of falling and terrified of flying at the same time. Keanu let him sit with the decision. No pressure, no rush, only presence. Finally, Evan lifted his head just enough to glance at Keanu. His voice was barely more than a whisper when he asked what would happen if he failed. Keanu answered without hesitation. Then you fail forward. You learn something. You get better. You keep going. He reminded him that failure wasn't the enemy. Fear was. Evan nodded slowly, not fully convinced yet, but clearly moved. Keanu extended the final piece of reassurance. He told him that his studio wasn't a test. It wasn't an audition. It was a safe place to create. A place where Evan could be heard. A place where his talent could be captured honestly. Evan exhaled shakily, gripping the guitar once more, grounding himself in the one thing that had always been there for him. Then he gave the smallest, most vulnerable nod. Not a confident nod, not a decisive one, but a nod that said he was willing to try. And for Keanu, that was enough. That was the moment he knew he had made the right choice. The next evening arrived faster than Evan expected. All day his chest had been tight with a mixture of anticipation and dread, a tug of war between the possibility of a new beginning and the fear of being exposed as unworthy. He finished his classes early, rushed through another long delivery shift, and spent far too long staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror of the restaurant restroom. He didn't know what someone was supposed to wear to a studio. He didn't know how someone like him was supposed to act in a place where real musicians created real art. In the end, he simply showed up as himself, wearing the same faded jeans and the same oversized shirt. The guitar case, as always, was slung over his back. Keanu greeted him at the door with a warm smile that softened the tightness in Evan's stomach. He didn't comment on Evan's clothes. He didn't comment on the nervous tremor in Evan's hands. He simply welcomed him inside as though Evan belonged there. And for the first time that day, the young man felt a small wave of relief. The studio wasn't what Evan had imagined. It wasn't intimidating or glamorous or packed with expensive equipment meant to impress visitors. Instead, it felt like a sanctuary. Soundproof walls wrapped the room in a calm whisper, absorbing every echo. Soft, warm lighting created a gentle glow across the polished floors. Guitars of different shapes and ages rested neatly on stands along one wall. Vintage microphones hung suspended in front of comfortable chairs. A few cameras sat on shelves beside stacks of old music notebooks, handwritten lyrics, and small personal trinkets that hinted at years of quiet creativity. It felt less like a professional studio and more like a place where truth was allowed to breathe. Evan stood frozen near the doorway, overwhelmed by the possibility that he didn't deserve to be in a room like this. Keanu noticed the tension in his shoulders and gently moved to put the young man at ease. He didn't rush to set up equipment or ask Evan to play immediately. Instead, he stepped into the kitchen area and made 2 cups of tea. When he handed one to Evan, the steam rising from the cup seemed to ease the stiffness in the boy's fingers. They sat for a few minutes talking about school and work, about how late-night shifts blurred together, and how community college felt both hopeful and exhausting. Evan loosened a bit with each passing moment. Keanu listened without judgment, giving him time to settle into the unfamiliar environment. The tea warmed Evan's hands, and slowly the studio felt less like someone else's world and more like a place where he was allowed to exist. When Keanu sensed that Evan's breathing had finally steadied, he stood up and gestured toward the main recording space. He told him gently that there was no pressure and no expectation. This was just a chance to let his music sound the way it was meant to sound. Pure, honest, uninterrupted. Evan followed him each step tentative, each breath careful, but with a spark of trust beginning to form beneath the fear. He was entering a new world, and he wasn't doing it alone. Keanu walked Evan through the recording space with the same gentleness he had shown the night before. He pointed out the microphones, explaining in simple terms how each one captured sound differently. He showed him the soft acoustic panels lining the walls, the ones designed to hold every vibration without letting it escape. Evan listened carefully, nodding, though his nerves were still visible in the tight way he held his guitar case strap. Keanu opened the case latch slowly, giving Evan a chance to stop him if he wasn't ready. But Evan remained still, watching his own battered guitar come into the open under the studio lights. Its scratches looked sharper here, its age more pronounced. For a moment he felt ashamed, as if his instrument didn't belong in a room filled with perfectly maintained guitars and polished equipment. Keanu sensed the shift and rested a hand gently on the top of the case. He told Evan that the worth of a guitar wasn't in its appearance, but in the sound it carried, and the stories held in its wood. He said many of his own favorite instruments were the ones with the most scars, the ones that had lived alongside him. Evan's shoulders eased a little at that, and he lifted the guitar out of the case with the kind of reverence only someone who had depended on music to survive would understand. Keanu positioned a stool in the center of the room, angled slightly toward a vintage microphone. He motioned for Evan to sit, then adjusted the height of the stand so the mic met the level of his guitar. Everything he did was slow, measured, patient. Evan didn't feel like a student being instructed. He felt like someone being guided by a friend. Once the equipment was set, Keanu showed him how to sit comfortably, how to make sure the guitar's body wasn't pressed too tightly against him, how to breathe. so the sound came out clean and full. Evan tried to follow every instruction, but his hands shook more than he wanted. Keanu noticed and reassured him that nervousness was normal, even for professionals. What mattered wasn't perfection. It was honesty. Evan nodded, swallowing hard. He loosened his grip on the strings, took a slow breath, and let the studio settle around him. Keanu moved behind a small camera he had placed on a tripod. It was nothing flashy, just a high-quality lens with simple settings. He angled it slightly upward to catch Evan's expression, adjusting the lighting so the shadows framed him naturally. Then Keanu stepped back and said something that made Evan freeze again. He told him to play whatever was in his heart, not what he thought sounded impressive, not what he thought a professional studio required, just what was real. Evan stared down at his guitar, absorbing the weight of that invitation. It was the kind of request that demanded vulnerability, and he wasn't sure he could reveal that much of himself. But he knew why he was there. He knew what Keanu saw in him. He knew the door had been opened. Slowly, he lifted his hands into position, breathing through the fear. He was ready to begin. Evan closed his eyes for a brief moment, steadying himself. He let the silence settle, letting it fill the space around him, until the tension in his chest loosened. When he finally began to play the first note, emerged fragile and trembling like a bird, unsure of its own wings. But the second note grew steadier, and the third carried weight. Within seconds, the trembling faded, and his fingers moved with the familiar instinct born from years of playing in lonely corners and empty parking lots. He chose Hurt, a song he had reinterpreted countless times when he needed to release emotions he didn't know how to express. But here in this studio, under the gentle glow of warm lights and the quiet support of someone who believed in him, the arrangement took on a different shape. It was slower, deeper, filled with an ache that felt raw even to him. The room embraced every vibration, capturing it with clarity he had never heard before. Keanu watched from behind the camera, barely breathing. He wasn't listening to a performance. He was witnessing a revelation. Evan's shoulders softened as he played, his brow furrowing during the more painful passages, his breath catching when the melody dipped into its quietest moments. It wasn't flawless, it wasn't polished, but it was honest in a way no amount of training could ever replicate. It was the sound of someone who had lived through too much, but still found the strength to translate his story into music. As the final note faded, Evan lowered his hands slowly, almost afraid to open his eyes. When he finally looked up, his lashes were damp. He wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed, muttering that he hoped it wasn't terrible. He said he knew it wasn't perfect. He said he wasn't sure it was even worth recording. Keanu stepped out from behind the camera, his expression soft but unwavering. He told Evan it was more than worth recording. It was rare. It was real. It was the kind of sound people remembered long after it ended. And in that moment, standing in a quiet studio, far from the rest of the world, Evan finally began to believe that maybe, just maybe, his music deserved to be heard. Evan sat on the edge of the studio chair long after the last note of Hurt faded from the room. His hands rested limply in his lap, still trembling from the emotional weight of the performance. He didn't know what happened next. He wasn't sure he even wanted to know. Some part of him feared that the moment had been too intimate, too revealing, too raw to be captured on camera. But Keanu moved with calm assurance, treating the recording with the same kind of respect Evan had shown his guitar. Keanu transferred the footage to his editing setup, a simple workstation tucked in the corner of the studio. No flashy monitors, no neon lights, no oversized speakers. Just a modest screen, a comfortable chair, and the quiet focus of someone who took creativity seriously. Evan watched from a few steps away, unsure whether he should sit, stand, or leave. Keanu motioned for him to come closer, telling him gently that this part mattered just as much as the performance itself. He pulled up the raw footage, and Evan winced at the sight of himself on camera. He saw every flaw, every hesitation, every uneven breath. He braced himself for disappointment, but Keanu didn't look for flaws. He watched with a stillness that made Evan feel seen for the first time. When the video ended, Keanu nodded slowly, as if acknowledging something unspoken. Then he got to work. He adjusted the lighting in the footage, brightening the warm tones, bouncing off the guitar's wooden body. He softened the shadows around Evan's eyes, not to hide anything, but to highlight the depth in his expression. Evan watched the screen in disbelief as the room transformed into something cinematic. Each subtle shift made the space look richer, more intimate, more intentional. It didn't look staged. It looked real, honest, personal. Next, Keanu moved to the audio. He lifted the volume of the softer passages without altering their emotion. He cleaned up the faint background hum without erasing the natural breath between chords. Every decision was careful, deliberate. He wasn't embellishing Evan's performance. He was revealing it. Evan leaned forward slightly, unable to look away. It felt like watching someone polish a stone he'd always assumed was ordinary, only to slowly uncover the glimmer beneath. He whispered quietly that he had never heard himself sound like this. Keanu smiled at his awe and told him this was who he had always been. The world just hadn't heard him yet. Evan swallowed a lump in his throat. No one had ever taken this much care with anything he made. No one had ever treated his music as if it mattered. Watching Keanu work, he realized that this wasn't just editing. It was belief, genuine belief in him, and it shook him more than the performance itself. Keanu continued working with a steady focus, moving through each frame with the care of someone handling something fragile and precious. Evan stood close enough to see, but far enough not to interfere. He felt like he was watching a world he never imagined himself stepping into. Every click, every adjustment, every slow refinement reminded him that this moment was real. Someone was treating his music with the same respect artists reserve for masterpieces. The thought alone made his chest tighten. After finishing the lighting and audio, Keanu added a gentle, ambient layer to round out the sound. It wasn't artificial. It was the natural hum of the studio room captured subtly, so the performance felt alive rather than sterile. Evan didn't know anything about editing, but he could feel the difference. His playing sounded fuller, cleaner, and more expressive without losing its vulnerability. He whispered that it almost sounded like someone else. Keanu shook his head and corrected him softly. "This is you, Evan. This is who you are when the world is quiet enough to hear you." Evan didn't know how to respond. His throat tightened as he watched himself on the screen once more. He saw the slight movements of his shoulders, the tremble in his breath, the way his eyes drifted shut during the deepest parts of the melody. He didn't see a delivery boy in worn shirts and tired shoes. He saw an artist, a real one, and the realization was so foreign that it almost scared him. Keanu asked if he wanted to choose the frame for the beginning of the video. Evan hesitated, then reached forward with shaking fingers. He picked a frame where his hands were placed on the strings right before the first note, a moment of stillness before release. Keanu approved the choice with a quiet nod and locked it in. When the final video finished, rendering the screen displayed a polished professional recording. It had depth, warmth, soul. The colors were soft and natural, the audio clear, the emotion unmistakable. It looked like something filmed by a full production crew, not something created in a quiet room by two people, one of whom could barely believe he was there. Evan stared at it without blinking. His lips parted, then closed again. His eyes shimmered as though the image on the screen had unraveled something tightly wound inside him. He whispered, he didn't know how to deserve this. Keanu gently reminded him that he wasn't giving Evan anything. He was showing the world what had always been there. Evan bowed his head, overwhelmed. No one had ever invested time, patience, or effort like this into him. Not a teacher, not a mentor, not a friend. He had carried his music alone for so long that watching someone else care for it felt unreal. Keanu didn't rush him. He simply saved the final file and opened the submission page for Rising Stars, an emerging talent show known for discovering hidden musicians. The form was simple. A name, a background paragraph, a link to the video. Evan watched each field appear on the screen like the beginning of a future he had never dared to imagine. And for the first time in his life, the world felt just a little larger and a little closer. Keanu entered the final details into the submission form, pausing only to check whether Evan wanted to add anything else. Evan shook his head quickly, unsure what someone like him could possibly say that mattered. Keanu reassured him that the music already spoke louder than any paragraph could. When they reached the field for the audition video link, he uploaded the file privately, ensuring only the Rising Stars team would have access. Before clicking submit, Keanu turned to Evan and asked if he was ready. The young man hesitated, fingers nervously twisting the edge of his guitar strap. He said he didn't know if anyone would care about his story. He didn't know if he had what it took to stand on a stage. He didn't know if this was all too big for him. Keanu listened, letting the fear spill out without interruption. When Evan finished, he gave him a calm, steady answer. "No matter what happens next, the world will hear you in this video. They will see you. They will feel what I felt the first moment your music reached my window. That is already enough." It was the kind of reassurance that didn't feel forced or exaggerated. It felt true. Evan nodded slowly, swallowing back the swirl of uncertainty inside him. He gave Keanu permission, and with a single click, the submission was sent. The room felt different after that. Lighter, fuller, like a quiet threshold had been crossed. Evan stared at the confirmation message on the screen, hardly believing it belonged to him. For the first time, the possibility of a different life didn't feel like a distant fantasy. It felt like something he was moving toward, step by trembling step. Before he left, Keanu offered one final instruction. He placed a hand on Evan's shoulder and told him that no matter how far this journey took him, there was one rule he needed to honor. "No one uses my name. Not the producers, not the audience, not anyone. This is your journey, Evan, not mine." Evan felt those words settle deep in his chest, grounding him with both responsibility and freedom. He nodded with quiet determination. As he walked out of the studio that night, guitar case strapped to his back, he felt taller than when he had arrived. For the first time in his life, he felt like someone worth believing in. A week passed slowly, each day stretching longer for Evan than the last. He checked his email obsessively between pizza deliveries, his stomach tightening every time his screen lit up. Most messages were promotional ads, class updates, or automated reminders from work. Nothing from Rising Stars. With every passing hour, he convinced himself more deeply that the audition team must have watched his video and dismissed it within seconds. He told himself he had been naive to hope, that he had misread Keanu's belief in him, that people like him didn't get opportunities like this. On the 7th morning, while packing his backpack for school, a new notification appeared. The subject line was short: Rising Stars Audition Invitation. His breath caught so sharply, he nearly dropped his phone. His hands trembled as he opened the email, eyes moving slowly over each word, as if he needed to see them multiple times to understand they were real. The message congratulated him, informing him that he had been selected for the live auditions scheduled for the following week. A specific date, time, and studio location were listed at the bottom. No explanation, no extra notes. Just an invitation. He read it 3 times, then a 4th. Then he sat down on the edge of his bed, feeling the blood rush from his face. He didn't know what to do. He didn't have a car to get there. He didn't have clothes that looked even remotely presentable. He didn't have confidence. His entire body felt like it was trembling loose from the inside, and for several minutes he couldn't move. He feared breathing too deeply might make the moment disappear. Finally, after what felt like an hour, he sent a message to Keanu. He didn't ask for anything. He simply forwarded the email with a short, shaky sentence beneath it. "I think they said yes." Keanu replied within minutes. His message was calm and steady, exactly the opposite of what Evan felt. He told him he would pick him up early on the morning of the audition and that there was nothing to panic about. He reminded him that the video wasn't luck. It was talent being seen for the first time. The day of the audition arrived with a cold morning breeze sweeping across Los Angeles. Evan waited outside his apartment complex, clutching his guitar case with both hands. He wore the cleanest shirt he owned, though the collar was still slightly frayed. His shoes were worn, the laces mismatched. He looked every bit as nervous as he felt. Keanu arrived right on time, stepping out of his car with a soft smile that eased some of the tension in Evan's chest. In his hand, he carried a simple black jacket, nothing flashy, nothing extravagant, just something clean fitted and quietly confident. He handed it to Evan with a warm nod. Evan hesitated at first, unsure if he deserved something that looked so new. But Keanu told him gently to wear it, that it suited him, that confidence often started with something small. Evan slipped it on, surprised at how different he felt beneath the fabric. Not transformed, but steadier. And for the first time that morning, he took a full breath. The drive to the Rising Stars studio felt unreal to Evan. Buildings blurred past the window as he held his guitar case tightly against his chest, trying to stop his hands from shaking. His stomach twisted with nerves. Every few minutes he glanced at the audition email on his phone, half expecting it to vanish. Keanu kept the atmosphere calm, talking about everyday things, traffic, the weather, how early morning light made the city feel softer. Evan appreciated it. It grounded him. It reminded him to breathe. When they arrived at the studio, Evan felt small, standing outside the large glass doors. Dozens of people were already gathered inside, some laughing loudly, others practicing vocals, and some pacing nervously, just like him. Bright posters of past winners lined the walls. It felt like a world he had no passport for. He almost told Keanu he couldn't do it, that he should go home, that this had been a mistake. But Keanu placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. He told him to take one step at a time, just one. Inside the lobby buzzed with energy. Contestants dressed in bold outfits rehearsed in corners, warming up their voices or tuning guitars far nicer than Evan's. He kept his eyes low, afraid someone might judge the frayed case on his back. But no one paid him any attention. Everyone was too focused on their own panic. Keanu stayed with him until registration, then stepped aside when the producers announced the waiting area. Before Evan walked away, Keanu gave him one final reminder. Breathe. Play with your heart. You belong here. Evan nodded, though his legs felt unsteady as he followed the other contestants. The audition room was nothing like the loud lobby. It was quiet, cold, and bright, with 3 judges seated behind a long table. Each of them carried the tired expression of professionals who had already watched dozens of average performances that morning. They barely looked up when Evan entered. One of them asked for his name without emotion. Another motioned for him to begin when ready. They expected nothing, just another face, another hopeful musician. Evan sat on the stool placed in the center of the room, positioning his guitar the way Keanu had shown him. His heartbeat pounded loudly in his ears. His palms were slick with sweat. But when he took his first breath, the world around him faded. He thought of the nights in parking lots, of the loneliness that shaped his music of the moment. Keanu heard him for the first time. Then he played. The arrangement of Hurt filled the room with raw emotion. The judges, previously indifferent, lifted their heads almost instantly. The melody was sharp, intimate, trembling with pain and hope in equal measure. Evan didn't perform. He told a story, his story, through every chord. By the final note, the silence in the room was heavy and reverent. The judges exchanged instinctive looks, not surprised, but moved. This wasn't just talent, it was discovery. A moment later, all 3 gave him a unanimous yes. When Evan's audition finally aired on television, it slipped into living rooms across America on an ordinary Tuesday evening. The episode featured dozens of performers, dancers with bright costumes, singers with rehearsed backstories, and musicians with polished equipment and confident smiles. But it was Evan's quiet entrance, thin frame, frayed guitar case, soft eyes that made people lean in without realizing they were doing it. There was something different about him before he even played a note. The host announced his name, his age, and the fact that he worked as a pizza delivery boy. The audience murmured with polite curiosity. Another underdog, another hopeful. But when Evan settled on the stool, placing his second-hand guitar across his lap with a tenderness that felt almost sacred, the room quieted. Even through the TV screen, viewers sensed the shift. Then he began to play. The first notes of his arrangement of Hurt rippled through the studio with a softness that felt like a whispered confession. It wasn't showy, it wasn't loud, but it carried emotion in a way that cut clean through the noise of the world. Millions of people who had left the TV on while cooking dinner or folding laundry suddenly stopped what they were doing. They looked up, they listened, they felt something. It was rare for an audition performance to feel intimate, but Evans did. His fingers moved with precision, shaped by years of solitary practice, yet the sound carried the rawness of someone who had lived without safety nets. His shoulders relaxed into each chord, his breath synced with the melody, his head tilted softly when the notes deepened. It wasn't perfect from a technical standpoint, but it was honest in a way that audiences weren't used to seeing on television. When the last note faded, the studio audience erupted. At home, people felt a lump in their throats without knowing why. Social media lit up within minutes. Comments poured in from strangers across the country. "He plays like he's survived something. This doesn't sound like a kid. This sounds like a lifetime. I felt every note. Who is this boy? Where has he been?" The camera cut to Evan's face as he received the unanimous yes from the judges. His expression was stunned, but what caught the viewers most was the flicker in his eyes, a mixture of disbelief, relief, and a hint of hope he didn't know how to hold yet. It wasn't pride, it was recognition. For the first time in his life, Evan looked like someone who believed he might matter. Across the city, Keanu watched from his old apartment, sitting alone on his couch. There was no celebration, no calls, no posts, just a small, warm smile spreading across his face as he watched Evan's hands tremble with joy on live television. Keanu didn't tell a single soul what he had done. He didn't want credit. He didn't want attention. His only reward was seeing the shift in Evan's eyes the moment belief bloomed. It was enough. The days following the broadcast felt unreal for Evan. He returned to his normal routine, school in the morning, deliveries at night, but the world around him had shifted. Customers who once barely looked at him suddenly paused when he approached their doors. Some tilted their heads, squinting as if trying to place his face. One middle-aged woman gasped softly and said she recognized him from that guitar show, though she couldn't remember his name. Evan laughed nervously, insisting she must be mistaken, but deep down he knew the truth. People were starting to see him. Online, the clip spread quickly, not because of flashy editing or dramatic storytelling, but because viewers felt something real in his performance. Comment sections filled with messages from strangers across the country. Some wrote about their own struggles, saying Evan's music reminded them of nights they spent fighting silent battles. Others said the honesty in his fingers felt like a voice they hadn't heard in years. A few even admitted that his vulnerability made them cry. Music bloggers reposted his audition, calling it a reminder of what artistry looked like before the world became obsessed with perfection. One wrote that Evan played like someone who had lived 100 lives in 20 years. Another described his sound as quiet resilience wrapped in melody. The phrases made Evan blush when he saw them, unsure how to accept such praise. He didn't know how to be talked about. He didn't know how to be seen. At the pizza shop, his coworkers teased him affectionately. They played the audition clip on repeat during closing shifts, loud enough for the kitchen to hear. Even the manager, a man known for counting pennies and saving praise for payroll meetings, patted Evan on the back and told him he had something special. Evan smiled, but he still showed up early for every shift, tied his apron the same way, and delivered every order with the same quiet politeness. Fame, even in its smallest form, didn't change the habits built from years of hardship. Meanwhile, Keanu kept his distance not because he didn't care, but because he wanted Evan to stand on his own feet. He watched every clip, every comment thread, every repost. He saw how people gravitated toward the boy's authenticity, how they embraced his imperfections rather than overlooking them. Keanu felt an unmistakable pride swelling in his chest each time Evan's name trended even mildly. But he never reached out to claim any part of it. This was Evan's path now, and he walked it with the dignity of someone who understood the responsibility of anonymity. Late at night after his final delivery, Evan would sit on the edge of his bed and watch the audition replay, not out of vanity, but disbelief. He didn't recognize the boy on the screen. That boy looked stronger, braver, more certain of his place in the world. Evan touched the worn wood of his guitar and wondered how someone like him had ended up touching millions. Yet the biggest change wasn't in the view counts or comments. It was in the quiet way Evan now lifted his head just a little higher when he walked through the world. The second round of Rising Stars arrived faster than Evan expected. His audition had barely settled into the public's imagination before the producers sent him the next call sheet. The email contained stage notes, time slots, and a short message reminding him to bring the same guitar he had used in his first performance. They said it was becoming iconic, though Evan found that word almost absurd. He still saw it as the old battered instrument that carried him through lonely nights in parking lots. He didn't see it as anything worthy of attention. On the morning of his return, Evan woke with a knot in his stomach. The first audition had been terrifying, but this one felt heavier. People now expected something from him. The quiet anonymity that had once shielded him was gone. He took the bus to the studio clutching his guitar as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. He arrived early, long before the lobby became crowded with other contestants, and he sat by himself against the wall staring at the stage door that separated him from the world he still felt unprepared to face. When he stepped backstage, reality hit him with full force. The producers had designed an elaborate lighting setup for his performance. Warm spotlights, slow-moving overhead beams, and soft ambient glows formed an atmospheric scene. The crew fussed over angles and colors, adjusting gels and dimmers, testing the contrast against the wood of his guitar. Evan watched it all with wide eyes, overwhelmed. He didn't understand why they were putting so much effort into someone like him. He wasn't a showman, he wasn't theatrical, he wasn't trained for spectacle. He whispered to one of the crew members that it felt like too much. The man laughed kindly and told him that sometimes simplicity needed a frame, and the producers believed his music deserved one. Those words settled somewhere deep in Evan's chest. When the stage manager finally called his name, he stepped forward with a quiet breath. The crowd before him was larger than last time, the studio buzzing with anticipation. People recognized him now. He saw a few audience members whisper and point toward him before the lights dimmed. Maybe they remembered the soft-spoken boy with the trembling hands who had surprised everyone with his raw arrangement of Hurt. This time, Evan chose a soft ballad, a song he had written during a long night when life felt too heavy and the world too loud. It wasn't technically dazzling, but it carried warmth, sorrow, and hope, all woven together. When he positioned his guitar and settled into the first note, the room grew still with expectation. His fingers moved slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The melody drifted across the studio, like a memory returning after being forgotten for too long. The sound was gentle, but powerful, the kind of music that seeped through the cracks of even the hardest hearts. The audience leaned in as the vulnerability in his playing filled the air. By the time he reached the final verse, people in the front rows were already standing. When the last note finally faded, the entire room rose to its feet. Evan looked stunned. He had never heard applause like that, applause that wasn't polite but grateful. The moment Evan stepped off stage, he felt the tremor in his hands return not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming realization that the audience had risen for him. He had never imagined bringing people to their feet, not with a guitar that was older than most contestants, not with a voice made of strings instead of words. The backstage hallway buzzed as crew members offered him soft nods of admiration, the kind reserved for artists who had unexpectedly shifted the energy of a room. One producer approached him with a bright smile and said his performance gave them goosebumps. Another said they had replayed his audition video earlier that morning to remind themselves why they worked in television. Evan didn't know how to receive praise like that. He simply kept his eyes low and thanked them quietly, gripping his guitar strap like a lifeline. As the show went on, something unusual happened. Viewers at home began searching for Evan's original audition video again. People wanted to rewatch the first spark that had brought this soft-spoken guitarist into their hearts. But more than that, they wanted to know who had filmed it. The quality was too good, too emotional, too cinematic to be a simple phone recording. Comments flooded social media. Who filmed this? It looks like a movie. That lighting isn't normal. Was this done by a film crew? Why does it feel like someone really cared while recording him? Speculation spread quickly. Some said it had to be a small production company trying to help an unknown talent. Others theorized he had a mentor, maybe a professor, or an industry insider, someone who understood artistry and wanted to stay out of the spotlight. A few even speculated about record labels quietly backing him. Evan watched the conversations unfold with a mix of disbelief and guilt. He wanted to tell the world the truth, that it wasn't a company or a crew, but one quiet man with a camera and a heart big enough to lift someone else's dream. But he had promised, and he intended to honor that promise. When interviewers backstage casually asked who filmed his first video, Evan gave the same answer each time. A friend. Just someone who believed in me. He never elaborated. He never used Keanu's name. He never hinted at the truth. The mystery only made viewers more intrigued. By the end of the night, Evan's second performance clip began trending. Not because of dramatic editing or showmanship, but because people felt something deeply authentic in the way he played. He didn't try to be a TV personality. He didn't polish himself to fit expectations. He didn't pretend to be bigger than he was. He brought his whole heart quietly, honestly onto the stage, and the world started listening. Success arrived faster than Evan ever imagined, but so did the pressure. After the second round aired, his inbox filled with messages from reporters requesting interviews. Articles appeared online, dissecting his personality, his tone, his silence, his humility. Producers from Rising Stars began asking him to share more of his backstory on camera, hoping to build a compelling narrative around him. They wanted dramatic sound bites, emotional confessions, and scenes that would make the audience cry. Evan tried to answer politely, but each new request tightened something inside his chest. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. His entire life had been built around keeping his head down, doing his work, and staying out of the way. Fame, even a small taste of it, felt like stepping under a spotlight he didn't ask for. He didn't know how to perform for people outside the context of his guitar. He wasn't loud or charismatic or witty. He was quiet, thoughtful, almost invisible when he wasn't holding an instrument. Social media made it worse. At first, the comments were overwhelmingly supportive. But as the show gained momentum, a different conversation began to unfold. Some viewers wondered whether someone as soft-spoken as Evan could survive an industry built on attention. Others questioned whether he had enough stage presence to compete with contestants who belted powerful notes or executed extravagant routines. A few comments were harsher, suggesting he was too shy, too plain, too quiet to stand out long-term. Evan read those posts late at night from his bed long after his shifts ended. He told himself not to care, but the words dug into him. They didn't just criticize his performance, they criticized who he was. His quietness wasn't an act, it was his nature. Every doubt he thought he had buried came rushing back. His old fears whispered louder than ever. Maybe he didn't belong here. Maybe he wasn't strong enough. Maybe the judges had made a mistake. As the semifinals approached, these doubts grew heavier. Producers sent him rehearsal schedules and reminders about televised interviews. They wanted to film a short documentary-style clip about his background. They asked if he had a dramatic childhood story or a turning point they could highlight. Evan didn't know how to answer. His life wasn't dramatic. It was simply hard, quiet, unremarkable. He didn't want to exaggerate anything. He didn't want to turn his struggles into entertainment. By the end of a long rehearsal day, he felt drained. The lights, the noise, the pressure, the eyes following him, it all wrapped around him like a tightening rope. On his way home, he passed the old parking lot where he used to practice. The familiar sight pulled at his memory. The cracked pavement, the dim street lamp, the lonely quiet. It felt like a refuge. Without thinking, he walked toward it, breath trembling. He took out his guitar and sat on the seat of his old motorbike, just as he had the night Keanu first heard him. For the first time in weeks, he let the world fall away. And he played. The first few notes that left Evan's guitar were shaky, but as his fingers settled into familiar shapes, the tension in his chest loosened. The parking lot carried the same quiet stillness. It always had the same gentle echo that made the notes feel like they were drifting into the night sky. Here, he wasn't a contestant. He wasn't a rising internet sensation. He wasn't a topic of debate or speculation. He was just Evan, a kid with a guitar and too many thoughts. He let out everything he'd been holding in, the pressure, the fear, the exhaustion from pretending he wasn't overwhelmed. His melody turned raw, the kind that came from deep under the ribs, aching and real. He played until his breathing steadied, until the sound in his ears matched the rhythm of his heart again. Each chord felt like shedding a weight he couldn't name. Evan didn't hear the approaching footsteps. He was too lost in the music, too lost in the release. But when he finished the phrase and lifted his head, he saw a familiar figure standing a few feet away. Keanu, hands in his pockets, a calm expression on his face. No judgment, just understanding. Evan startled, immediately wiping his eyes, embarrassed to be seen breaking down. He stammered an apology, saying he didn't know anyone was here. He tried to explain the pressure, the comments, the expectations, but the words tangled in his throat, and frustration rose in his eyes again. Keanu stepped closer, sitting beside him on the old motorbike seat, just like the night everything began. He didn't ask why Evan was there. He didn't ask what was wrong. He already knew. He had seen enough rising talents crumble under the weight of attention. He recognized the signs long before Evan did. He told Evan softly that the noise of the world would never stop. The industry would always push. People would always talk. But music? Real music didn't come from noise. It came from truth. It came from the quiet moments, the buried emotions, the places where words failed, but melody could still reach. He reminded him that none of the pressure had anything to do with why he played in the first place. Evan dropped his gaze, fingers curling around the neck of his guitar. He admitted that he felt like an imposter, like he was pretending to be someone worthy of attention. Like everyone else backstage had more charisma, more presence, more confidence. Keanu listened, letting the confession spill freely. Then he told Evan something he had carried through his own life. Being loud wasn't the same as being strong. Being flashy wasn't the same as being real. The world had enough noise. What it needed was honesty, and that was the very thing Evan had more of than anyone else on that stage. The words hit something deep inside him. Keanu wasn't trying to motivate him. He wasn't delivering a speech. He was speaking the truth quietly, sincerely, the way someone would speak to a friend lost in their own doubts. Evan's breathing eased, his shoulders lowered. He looked up at Keanu with eyes that no longer held fear, but a spark of recognition. A reminder of who he was before the cameras, before the audience, before the pressure twisted everything into something heavy. He lifted his guitar again, not to perform, but to feel, to remember. Keanu stayed beside him in silence, the kind of silence that heals. And in that quiet parking lot, under a dim street lamp, Evan began to believe again. The day of the semifinals arrived with a weight that pressed on Evan's chest from the moment he woke up. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bright stage lights, the panel of judges, the crowded studio audience waiting for him to play. But beneath that pressure, beneath the noise of his thoughts, there was something steady, Keanu's words from the parking lot. Music is not about noise, it's about truth. He repeated the sentence to himself like a lifeline. When he arrived at the Rising Stars studio, the atmosphere was electric. Cameras rolled across the stage, crew members shouted instructions, contestants rehearsed in every corner. The semifinals weren't like the earlier rounds. Everything was bigger, louder, sharper. The show had millions of viewers by now, and producers wanted explosive performances to match the scale. As he walked through the backstage corridor, Evan saw performers practicing intricate runs, dancers doing warm-ups, and musicians testing their high-end equipment. He slipped quietly into his assigned rehearsal room and opened his guitar case. His fingers brushed against the worn wood, grounding him. This time, he had prepared a new arrangement, something different from anything he had played before. It wasn't a cover. It wasn't familiar. It was an interpretation built from his own emotions, a melody shaped by sleepless nights, fear, gratitude, and the discovery of his own voice. The piece pushed him outside his comfort zone, but it felt real, and that mattered more. When the stage manager called him to take his place, Evan stepped onto the bright floor, blinking into the lights. The judges watched with measured expressions, expecting something gentle, something soft, something safe. They thought they understood him by now, a quiet guitarist with steady fingers and a tender heart. They didn't expect what he played next. The opening chords were delicate, almost hesitant, like a confession whispered into darkness. But the melody soon shifted, growing bolder, fuller, layered with tension and release. Evan's fingers moved with a confidence that surprised even him. His arrangement wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was unpredictable in the most emotional way. It carried everything he had lived, the loneliness, the doubt, the hope, the gratitude, and the quiet persistence that defined him. He poured every bit of truth into the strings. The judges leaned forward. The audience fell into a hush. Even the sound technicians paused behind their equipment. It wasn't polished in the traditional sense, but it was breathtaking in its honesty. By the time he finished, the silence felt sacred. Then the crowd erupted. The applause wasn't polite. It was thunderous. It was people standing because they couldn't remain seated after being hit by something so sincere. Evan's chest tightened with emotion as he stood on stage, head lowered, unsure whether to smile or cry. He bowed awkwardly, overwhelmed by the response, then followed the crew backstage with shaky legs. But he didn't know. The hardest moment of the night was still waiting for him. Backstage was chaotic after his performance. Contestants hurried past in a rush of nerves and adrenaline. Producers barked instructions. Through headsets and camera crews moved in tight circles, capturing every reaction. Evan tried to stay out of the way, gripping his guitar case close as he navigated the noise. His heart was still pounding from the intensity of the stage. He wasn't used to that kind of applause. He wasn't used to people rising to their feet because of something he'd created. It left him breathless. A producer motioned for him to step toward the media corner where a line of reporters waited behind velvet ropes. Evan swallowed nervously. Interviews were the part of the show he feared most. He always felt like he was going to say the wrong thing, reveal too much, or not know how to answer questions that demanded polished charm. But he walked forward because it was expected, because he wanted to honor the journey he had started. A young reporter with a microphone approached him first. Her smile was bright, but her eyes were focused sharp. She congratulated him on the performance, then asked a few predictable questions about his preparation, his emotional connection to the song, and how he felt on stage. Evan answered softly, stumbling here and there, but managing to stay steady by remembering Keanu's advice about truth. Then came the question he wasn't prepared for. The reporter leaned in, slightly lowering her voice with curiosity. "Evan, there's been a lot of speculation online about your audition video. People say it looks cinematic, almost professionally produced. So I have to ask, who filmed your audition so beautifully?" The air around him seemed to still. Evan felt the weight of the question settle heavily in his chest. He hadn't expected it, not here, not now, not right after the most intense performance of his life. He froze, eyes flicking instinctively toward the camera, pointed at him. The truth sat on his tongue. A truth he had kept quiet to protect the very person who gave him this chance. Keanu Reeves. The name alone could shift everything. It could overshadow the song, the performance, the journey. It could turn attention toward the actor instead of the young guitarist trying to carve a place for himself. Keanu had made one request: no one uses my name. This is your journey. But standing there with the reporter waiting, and the camera recording every breath he took, Evan realized that silence would only feed rumors, and lies would feel like betrayal. So he chose honesty. He spoke slowly, clearly, with the same sincerity he used when playing his guitar. A regular customer. A nice guy named Keanu Reeves. The room froze. Several reporters exchanged stunned glances. A few camera operators lifted their equipment in shock. The whisper spread instantly, rippling through the backstage area in seconds. Evan felt his pulse spike, but he continued calmly. He explained that Keanu didn't want attention, didn't want credit, didn't want his name to overshadow anything. He said Keanu helped him because he believed in him, not because he wanted to be part of a story. His voice remained soft, but certain. The moment the words left his mouth, social media exploded. Tweets multiplied. Clips spread, hashtags formed. People everywhere were stunned not by a celebrity cameo, but by the quiet act of kindness behind the entire journey. And just like that, the truth was out. But it didn't take away from Evan's performance. It made the world care even more. The moment Evan's backstage clip hit the internet, it spread with the force of a tidal wave. It didn't trickle through social media, it detonated. The short video of a soft-spoken guitarist calmly revealing that Keanu Reeves had filmed his audition reached 1 million views before the end of the night. By morning, it had multiplied several times, overcrossing platforms, countries, and communities. People didn't just share it. They reacted to it with a kind of stunned warmth, usually reserved for rare moments of pure humanity. The first wave of comments came from Rising Stars viewers who had been following Evan since the beginning. Many wrote that they always sensed something special in him, but learning that Keanu had quietly supported him without ever stepping into the spotlight made the story even more powerful. They called it the most wholesome twist on television this year. Others admitted they cried watching the reveal, saying it reminded them of the good still left in the world. Then came the second wave fans of Keanu Reeves. They flooded the clip with stories of his generosity, recounting moments when he had quietly paid for strangers' meals, given up his seat on subways, or donated to charities without announcing it. But this moment felt different. It wasn't just generosity, it was mentorship, kindness given with no expectation of credit, a small act that had transformed someone's entire life. The comment sections filled with gratitude, awe, and admiration. News outlets caught on fast. Headlines appeared across entertainment sites. Keanu Reeves secretly helps rising stars. Contestant. Delivery boy's audition, filmed by Keanu Reeves' internet melts. A random act of kindness turns into viral phenomenon. Major networks requested interviews wanting to talk about the unexpected connection. Bloggers edited together Evan's audition footage with emotional captions pairing his guitar melody with quotes about kindness and hope. One clip overlaid his original performance with the words, "He didn't need the spotlight. He just needed someone to believe in him." Within hours, Evan's follower count exploded. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. It didn't stop. His inbox filled with messages from musicians, students, single parents, and strangers who said his story made them believe in pursuing their own dreams again. Some said they had been on the brink of giving up, but watching his journey reminded them that talent could grow in the quietest corners of life. Meanwhile, the Rising Stars production team celebrated privately. Their ratings skyrocketed overnight. The semifinal episode, boosted by the viral clip, became the most watched segment of the entire season. Producers who once wondered if Evan's quiet nature would hurt the show now realized he had become its beating heart. But through all the noise, all the attention, all the frantic media coverage, one person stayed silent. Keanu. He didn't give statements. He didn't respond to interview requests. He didn't post on social media. He let the world talk while he remained exactly where he always had been, behind the scenes, quietly rooting for someone else's success. The only message he sent was a short text to Evan. "Stay true. I'm proud of you." Just one line. But Evan read it over and over, letting the words settle deep in his chest like a warm anchor. Evan didn't fully grasp the scale of what was happening until he stepped outside the following morning. The air felt different. People looked at him differently. At the bus stop, a teenage girl nudged her friend and whispered his name under her breath. A man scrolling on his phone looked up, suddenly his eyes widening in recognition. Someone even approached him gently to say his story had made their entire week. Evan wasn't used to being seen like this. Every interaction felt surreal, as if he'd stepped out of the quiet life he once lived and into a world that had been waiting for him without his knowledge. But the deepest shock came when he checked his phone during a break between classes. Notifications overflowed thousands of messages, tags, mentions, and comments. His backstage clip was everywhere. People weren't just reacting, they were connecting. Many wrote about the times they felt invisible and how Evan's journey reminded them their dreams still mattered. Others shared how Keanu's humility made them believe in silent kindness again. The combination of their stories, Evan's vulnerability, and Keanu's quiet generosity created a wave of emotion that swept across the internet. Evan scrolled until his eyes burned, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love. He didn't know how to respond to thousands of strangers, so he simply typed a small, sincere message and posted it on his page. "Thank you for listening." Within minutes, it gathered tens of thousands of likes. Meanwhile, news programs replayed the viral clip in their evening segments. Talk show hosts discussed it with admiration. Bloggers wrote heartfelt pieces about mentorship, unseen support, and the beauty of lifting someone else without asking for anything in return. A few journalists even tried to track down Keanu to request comments, but he remained unreachable. His silence added to the mystique, fueling even more respect online. Producers from Rising Stars, stunned by the surge in attention, called an emergency meeting to prepare for the spike in viewership. Evan's story had become the centerpiece of the season, an unexpected emotional anchor that resonated with audiences far beyond what the show anticipated. For the first time, the public wasn't rooting for him because of a polished performance or dramatic storyline. They were rooting for him because he represented something honest, something human, something good. Evan, however, stayed grounded. He still attended his classes, he still clocked in for his shifts, he still took late-night deliveries. Fame hadn't changed the rhythm of his life. If anything, it made him cherish the quiet moments even more. He knew the world could be loud and restless, but his music came from silence, and silence was where he understood himself best. That evening, as he lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, he reread Keanu's text again. "Stay true. I'm proud of you. No spotlight, no elaboration, no signature, just truth." And that was the message he carried with him into the next chapter of his journey. The days after the viral moment felt like stepping into a whirlwind. Evan woke to dozens of emails from record labels expressing interest in signing him. Some wrote long, flattering messages about his fresh sound and authentic story. Others offered short, sharp pitches promising exposure opportunity and fast-track success. Talk shows reached out with invitations to appear as a guest. Influencers asked for collaborations. Online producers wanted his music for their channels. It was everything aspiring artists dreamed about. But for Evan, it felt like too much. He tried to read each message carefully, but his chest tightened every time he opened one. He didn't understand contracts. He didn't know which offers were good or dangerous. He didn't know what he wanted. All he knew was that suddenly everyone wanted something from him, and he wasn't sure he had anything to give. The quiet life he once lived, school in the morning, delivery shifts at night, practicing in empty parking lots, now felt impossibly distant. The pressure built slowly. At work, coworkers told him he had to say yes to something soon. At school, classmates asked him for updates, assuming he already had a plan. Producers from Rising Stars advised him to lean into the publicity while the momentum was strong. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had advice. But none of it quieted the anxiety growing inside him. One evening, overwhelmed by the noise, he made his way to Keanu's studio. He didn't text ahead. He simply showed up at the door with tired eyes and his guitar case hanging loosely from his fingers. Keanu opened the door immediately, understanding the look without needing a word. He stepped aside, letting Evan into the warm, familiar space. Inside, the studio lights were dim. Instruments rested quietly along the walls. The room felt like a safe pocket of stillness in a world that had suddenly become too loud. Evan sat on the same stool he had used the night he recorded his audition. He placed his guitar next to him but didn't open the case. Instead, he lowered his head into his hands and whispered that he didn't know how to handle everything happening around him. He explained that he was scared not of failing, but of losing himself. The attention felt surreal, but it also felt dangerous. He worried he might become someone he didn't recognize. He worried he might disappoint people. He worried he wasn't strong enough to navigate fame without letting it change him. Keanu listened quietly, leaning against the counter with his arms folded. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to offer solutions. He understood these fears far too well. When Evan finished speaking, Keanu pulled up a chair and sat across from him, meeting him at eye level. He told him that the fear he felt was natural. He said he had felt it too during his earliest auditions, when directors doubted him, when scripts rejected him, when he stood on sets unsure if he belonged. He spoke softly about moments of failure, about nights spent wondering whether he was enough, about times when the pressure threatened to swallow him whole. And Evan listened, the weight in his chest slowly shifting into something more bearable. Keanu leaned back slightly in his chair and took a slow breath before continuing. He told Evan that people often believed fame changed a person. They imagined the spotlight as a force that rewrote character, reshaped values, and erased humility. But the truth, he said gently, was far simpler. Fame didn't change people. It amplified who they already were. If someone entered the spotlight craving attention or validation, it grew louder. If someone entered with generosity and integrity, those qualities grew stronger too. The spotlight didn't build character, it revealed it. Evan let those words soak in. He stared at the floor, turning the idea over in his mind. Fame amplifies who you already are. He wondered who he truly was beneath the fear, the noise, the sudden attention. He wasn't confident or bold or charismatic, but he cared deeply. He worked hard. He tried to be kind. He didn't seek fame. He sought honesty through music. Keanu sensed the shift in his thoughts and continued sharing memories from his early years in the industry. He spoke of auditions where he stood trembling behind doors, waiting to be called. He spoke of roles he desperately wanted, but lost. He spoke of moments when he doubted his own voice in a world full of louder ones. But he also spoke of the people who grounded him. Quiet mentors, unexpected supporters, and strangers whose kindness kept him steady. He told Evan that fear wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a reminder that he cared about the right things, and caring was what kept a person from drifting away from themselves. Keanu emphasized that the most important thing Evan could do was stay anchored in the qualities that made his music real in the first place: his humility, his sincerity, his honesty. Evan exhaled slowly, feeling the knot in his chest loosen. The storm of invitations and attention no longer felt like a demand for him to become someone different. They were simply opportunities, choices, doors he could open or walk past, nothing more. He didn't have to perform for fame. He didn't have to change his identity to satisfy the industry. He just had to stay true to the person he had always been. They sat in silence for a few moments, letting the calm settle over the room. The soft hum of the studio equipment blended with the quiet warmth of the lights. It felt safe, balanced, real. Evan finally lifted his guitar case and opened it, revealing the familiar worn wood that had carried him through every moment of confusion and clarity. He didn't play yet. He just held it for a moment, grounding himself. He looked at Keanu and whispered that he didn't know what the future held, but he wanted to walk into it without losing his heart. Keanu nodded with a soft, steady smile. He told him that as long as he remembered why he started playing in the first place, he would never lose himself, no matter how bright the spotlight became. Evan breathed in deeply, the fear shifting into something steadier. Balance. He felt it returning. The night of the Rising Stars finale arrived with an energy that felt different from every round before it. The venue lights were brighter, the crowd louder, the stakes higher. Yet when Evan stepped out of the car and took his first breath of the cold evening air, all he could think about was the weight of the old guitar in his hands. It was the same instrument he had carried through rain, worry, and loneliness. The same one he played in parking lots when no one knew his name. Tonight, producers had offered him 3 different high-end guitars, each polished and gleaming beneath studio lights. He declined them all. He didn't want a perfect instrument. He wanted the one that held his story. Inside the arena, thousands of people filled the seats, buzzing with anticipation. The finalists gathered backstage, adjusting their outfits, rehearsing lines, practicing smiles for the cameras. Evan stood among them, but felt like he was floating just outside the noise. He tightened the strap of his worn guitar and closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He told himself the same truth that Keanu had repeated to him again and again. Music wasn't about noise or attention. It was about honesty. If he stayed honest, he would be fine, no matter the outcome. The stage manager called his name. His heartbeat quickened, but didn't shake him. He stepped forward, his sneakers quiet on the glossy floor, and walked through the narrow tunnel that opened onto the massive stage. The crowd erupted the moment he appeared under the flood of lights. The sound washed over him, warm and overwhelming. He breathed it in, letting the energy flow through him instead of pushing against him. He walked to the center of the stage and took his place on the small wooden stool waiting there. Evan glanced at the judges briefly. They looked ready to experience something real. But his attention soon shifted to the audience stretching across the arena like a sea of faces and feelings. Somewhere in that sea, he believed Keanu might be there. Keanu always kept his promises quietly. Evan scanned the shadows and the upper tiers, but didn't see him yet. It didn't matter. He knew Keanu would come if he could. The host's voice echoed through the room as he introduced Evan. Cameras zoomed in from every angle. The audience quieted. Even the lights seemed to lower themselves gently, settling into a soft, respectful glow. Evan placed his fingers on the strings, steadying his breath. This time, he wasn't performing a cover. He wasn't recreating someone else's emotion. Tonight, he was offering the world a piece of himself. He began playing the first notes of his original composition, the one he had written after that night in the parking lot when Keanu told him he believed in him. The melody started fragile and slow, like a hesitant confession. Then it grew, weaving hope and ache together. The room leaned in. The sound carried a quiet purity that felt almost sacred. Every chord seemed to say that even the forgotten, the overlooked, and the exhausted could rise again. He kept playing, letting the music tell the story of the boy he had been and the person he was becoming. It felt like the entire world was listening. As Evan reached the midpoint of his performance, the melody shifted into something stronger. The soft tremble in his notes transformed into confident strokes that filled every corner of the arena. It was as though he finally let himself believe he deserved to be there. The judges sat back, eyes wide, recognizing a moment they would talk about long after the season ended. Some audience members placed their hands over their hearts without even realizing it. Others closed their eyes, letting the raw emotion wash through them. Backstage crew members who had seen hundreds of performers felt a chill run through the room. There was something deeply human in the way Evan played. A kind of gentle defiance, a message that talent could grow in the quietest places, far from the spotlight. And somewhere in the very back row, hidden beneath a simple cap and a worn hoodie, Keanu Reeves leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the young man he had once found in a dim parking lot under the Los Angeles night sky. Keanu had slipped in unnoticed just before the show began. He chose the very last row because he didn't want attention. He wanted the night to belong entirely to Evan. He watched the young musician pouring his soul into the chords, each note, carrying pieces of conversations they had shared. The fear Evan admitted, the doubts he struggled with, the quiet hope he tried hard not to say out loud. Keanu could hear all of it in the music. Evan didn't see him at first. His eyes stayed closed for much of the performance, his head bent low, fingers moving instinctively. But when the final section of the piece arrived, he lifted his gaze and let it sweep across the crowd. Not searching for applause, not searching for cameras. Searching for the one person who had opened that first door when every other door had been locked shut. The spotlight dimmed just a little, giving him space. Evan scanned the sea of faces. For a moment, he feared Keanu couldn't make it. Then, at the farthest section of the auditorium, almost swallowed by the shadows, he saw him. Keanu sat still and quiet, hands folded, eyes soft with pride. He didn't wave. He didn't stand. He simply nodded. That nod anchored Evan. It was a reminder of how far he had come. It was every quiet conversation, every late-night edit, every gentle reassurance. Evan closed his eyes once more and played the final passage of the song with a clarity that felt like truth. The last note hung in the air, trembling for a heartbeat before dissolving into silence. The room erupted. The judges rose to their feet. Audience members shouted his name. Cameras captured the moment from every angle. But Evan didn't look at the judges first. He didn't bask in the applause. His eyes returned to the back row where Keanu sat unmoving, still hiding beneath the cap. Evan smiled, a small, grateful, steady smile. That smile said everything the cameras would never understand. When the finals ended and the crowd slowly poured out of the auditorium, Keanu slipped away before anyone noticed he had been there. He didn't stay for interviews or celebrations. He didn't wait to see where Evan placed in the competition. He had already seen what mattered most. As he stepped outside into the cool Los Angeles night, he breathed in the quiet, letting the noise of the arena fade behind him. The moon above was gentle, the air still, the streets empty, except for the distant hum of passing cars. It was the kind of silence that invited reflection. Keanu walked with his hands in his pockets, moving at an unhurried pace. His thoughts drifted back to the night he first heard that haunting melody rising from the parking lot of his old apartment building. A simple moment. A tired evening. A delivery boy with a cheap guitar and a shy voice. Nothing about that night had seemed extraordinary at the time, and yet it had changed everything for someone who desperately needed a chance. He realized then that miracles rarely begin with grand gestures. They begin with attention, with noticing someone who believes no one sees them. Evan didn't need fame to survive. He needed someone to acknowledge the fire he carried quietly inside, someone to believe in him long before the audience did. Keanu thought about how many people live unseen, working late shifts, juggling school, carrying heavy pasts, holding on to fragile dreams in silence. The idea sat heavily in his chest, not in a painful way, but in a way that reminded him of how deeply human it is to need encouragement. As he reached an empty crosswalk, the memory of Evan sitting on that old motorcycle returned with sharp clarity. The posture of a kid who didn't dare take up space. The fingers moving skillfully, almost impossibly, on a guitar that looked ready to fall apart. The soft expression on his face as he played for no one. That night, Keanu hadn't known why he felt compelled to walk downstairs. He just moved, as if guided by instinct. Now, he understood. Sometimes people are placed in your path not to be saved, but to be recognized. Keanu kept walking, letting the city surround him. Lights flickered from apartment windows. A bus rumbled past. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and a siren wailed faintly. Life continued in its usual rhythm, unaware of the tiny shift that had just happened in another person's story. He felt grateful for the quiet. It allowed him space to think about how Evan had grown in such a short time. He had stepped onto a stage vulnerable and honest and shown the world who he was. But more importantly, he had begun to see his own worth. Keanu smiled to himself as he passed a mural painted on the side of an old brick building. It showed a pair of hands holding a small seedling. Underneath it were the words, "Hope grows where it is watered." The message felt true in a deeper way tonight. Evan had always been capable. All he needed was someone willing to offer him a little light. Keanu continued down the block, passing familiar streets he had walked for years. The city looked different tonight, softer somehow, as if it were holding its breath after witnessing a small miracle. He thought about how strange and beautiful it was that everything had started with a simple pizza order. Evan had knocked on his door expecting nothing more than a tip. Instead, he had unknowingly carried a spark that had been waiting for the right moment to ignite. The more Keanu reflected, the more he understood how often people underestimate the value of quiet kindness. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't chase applause. It simply appears at the moment someone most needs to feel seen. He remembered Evan's face the night he came to the studio for the first time. Nervous, doubtful, a little lost. And how different he looked on stage tonight. confident in a way he never believed he could be. Not arrogant, not loud, just sure of the truth he carried. Keanu felt no need to take credit for any of it. The beauty of helping someone lies not in claiming the moment, but in watching them claim their own. He knew Evan would continue growing long after the show ended. Doors that had once been locked were now opening for him. But more importantly, Evan had begun opening his own doors. He had started reaching out to other young musicians online, sharing tips, encouraging them, building a small community of artists who felt inspired by his journey. The cycle of kindness continued without Keanu needing to push it forward. As he approached his apartment, the night breeze brushed against his hair, reminding him of the parking lot where everything began. The memory made him pause at the top of the outdoor stairwell. He looked over the railing at the spot where Evan had once sat with that beat-up guitar pouring emotion into strings that barely held tune. It struck him how easily that moment could have been overlooked, how easily he might have walked past without listening, but he had stopped. And because he stopped, a life shifted course. He let that thought settle before turning toward his door. He knew Evan's story would go on without him at the center, and that was exactly how it should be. His place was simply to see the spark when the world wasn't looking. Before going inside, Keanu whispered a quiet hope into the night air, a hope that people watching Evan's journey would remember that talent lives everywhere, that dreams are not reserved for a privileged few, that sometimes the person delivering your dinner might be carrying a gift the world is waiting to hear, and that one small moment of belief can rewrite the path of an entire future. And so the message of the night became clear. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the turning point of someone else's life. Sometimes all it takes is paying attention. Have you ever met someone whose simple kindness changed your life in a way you didn't expect? And what story would you like to see Keanu Reeves in next? Keanu Reeves in